is
Recording
today,
in
February 7th,
progress.
2024 Finance Committee meeting to order. Do we have any public comment? Hey, Max.
Hello, my name is Maxwell Marangello. I live at 127 Central Park Terrace, Franklin, Massachusetts. I emailed the committee earlier with some comments regarding the fiscal policies. And I want to follow up and also provide a little bit of my background so it doesn't seem like my comments are coming out of left field. I graduated in 2022 from Bridgewater State University with a bachelor degree in political science with a concentration in public administration. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA and have taken classes in both economics, public policy, and public finance. One of the things I learned in those classes that was really sort of striking to me was the difference between public accounting and public finance. Public finance is actually a branch of economics. It's not accounting. And it takes account sort of the policy aspect of things like the economic impact of the budget on society. It takes into account opportunity costs or comparing sort of each line item to all the alternatives. And public accounting doesn't really do those things. And so when I was looking through the fiscal policy, I was realizing it reads more like an accounting document rather than sort of a public finance document. And I think that sort of as a finance committee, you have to look at the sort of the policy side of things, the economic side of things, in addition to the accounting side of things. And so that's just sort of my concern with sort of how you approach the budget, because a budget statement is really about our values, and we have to have a goal with what we do with our budget. And when you just look at accounting, you don't really view it through that lens. And so I was just hoping that if you were to revise the fiscal policy guidelines, to sort of look at it and frame it in that approach. Like, well, what's our objective? Is it to maximize the well-being of society? Is it equity? Is it sort of economy, efficiency? Like, what are the things we're looking at? And I don't feel like it does that currently. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents and thank you.
Give me a suggestion on how you think it would. Which you have them, I'm sure.
Yes. So I think just saying, what are our, we have this sort of strategic, we're working on a master plan, which also has some of our values too. But I think in terms of like just stating, our goal when we look at a public a blind item is this, not only is this doing a specific amount of good, but compared to all the other alternatives, is this the best use of our funds compared to everything else we could be spending money on? And I don't think it's sort of implicit, but I don't think we have explicitly said it. So I think just to explicitly say it, okay, we're trying to be explicitly saying we're trying to be utility maximizing, or look at those public sort of those pillars of a public administration that a lot of public administrators use. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with them as a public administrator. Looking at those sort of criteria and saying, do these things match those criteria? I think would be helpful. Making sure each line item meets the goals of our strategic plan, our master plan. And sort of our values as a town, because we could be spending money, it could be efficient, but if it doesn't match our values, then why are we spending money on it? So I think it's budgeting is inherently political, and I know sometimes it's easy to think that, like I said, politics is about who gets what and how much, and so as a finance committee, you might like to think it's kind of objective and neutral, but really it really is a very values-driven process, and I think that you should, as committee members, you should all take that into account when you look at our budget and sort of evaluate. Well, you have a police officer, you have a teacher, you have an ambulance. Like if or then you might have something that's not as important. And so, if you want to shift money from one thing to the other, you have to realize sort of what impact that has on our public. So thank you.
You're welcome. I read your letter 17 times. I guess I missed most of it. I don't know. We'll figure it out, though. Just
Can I
ask
just
Lorraine.
comment on it real quick, I guess? Because I'm reading through the policies, and I get what you're saying. I guess, yeah, I guess your suggestion, because again, and I don't know if people at home have access to it, but I'm guessing it was attached to the agenda. It would have to be, your suggestion would be to add like almost like a bullet point, because it's specific bullet points of each objective, would be to say, make decisions essentially, like that's what your suggestion is to add a bullet point that's saying, do all of the above with the goals of, doing right and, analyzing different options and things like that. I just want to make sure I get the ask.
Yeah, so my ask is actually have, like you said, bullet points that say what your values are, how your evaluating these public policy things, you know, like some sort of framework which we are evaluating sort of our budget. So, I mean, you could have all these, you know, right now you're saying you have the stabilization account, you have this account, you put this money amount here, but you don't talk about what your sort of what principles you are using to evaluate whether this is a worthwhile endeavor for our town when you spend money on something. And I think you should have, it could be broad criteria, it could be sort of, there could be a lot of wiggle room, it could be kind of vague, but I think you should have at least something that gives you the authority to look at the budget and say, this matches our values, and doing this as opposed to something else is in our best interest.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, so the problem with values is, just to be the cranky town manager, you know, is values are very subjective, right? So to define values is a whole public exercise in and of itself. You know, I'll go on a limb and say this, like what happened recently in Newton was about values and morality, but the bills can't get paid, right? Just as an example of what's been recently in the news. So we hear a lot about values and values about parental leave. Well, I have that value. I think we could talk about the expansion of our parental leave since I've been TA and since Karen's been here. That's a huge value, but eventually the bills have to get paid. And what people are going to realize is pretty soon is there will be a lot of values arguments. And I agree with Max, like I wish there was a more cogent way to do this, and this is why we're trying to hire a budget and fiscal analyst to try to look at a little bit more of historical data and try to have better data sets and be able to do a little bit deeper dive into these types of analytics and metrics that Franklin really has never had. I know we've talked about this as a group before, but even defining values, I mean, the master plan committee may be doing some of that as we speak, because I think they're meeting upstairs. But a lot of the financial policies really aren't about values, right? These are about bond rating. These are about financial solvency. These are about things like accounting and having a clean audit. You know, some things in here, like financial reserves, do probably go a little closer to what maybe Max is saying. I'm sure we'll talk about those in a few minutes, but most of the stuff here is I can't say he's wrong, and it's not as if they don't coexist. But to say that a budget needs to match our values, well, I can assure you the values of Franklin, there is no question in my mind, because I've said it every year for the last 6 years, the values in Franklin equal about $270 million worth of services. But we have a general fund budget of 134, right? Sidewalks aplenty, net zero all the time. I mean, all these things are values, and I share them, but we have to then find a way to pay for those values. The humanitarian crisis we're dealing with in Massachusetts, right? Clearly, that's a value we all hold, and actually has been, I think, a part of what not only Franklin but Massachusetts has said. You know, we're going to be welcoming, we're going to be, you know, warm, we're going to try to provide as much as we can, but I don't think I speak out of turn by saying, I mean, you know, there's obviously a financial commitment to meet that value. How are you going to meet that value? March 6th, we'll get to it later, you know, we'll start talking about this, for sure. You know, because the budget deficit will be substantially large, and eventually the question of values will come out. And like you're seeing in a lot of communities, and this is a trend we'll have this year into the future, is what are those values? You know, is it cutting police, fire, DPW, teachers? You know, what is that? Do we want a net zero police station? Are people willing to afford that? Or do they just want a brand new police station that's functional, and even if it's not exactly net zero, you know, I don't know the answers to all those questions. I'm just using them as examples to try to portray the difference between values, and my job is to actually balance the budget and pay the bills, which, you know, is hard when the values are pretty exorbitant, like Max is, I think, saying. So just a few additional thoughts about values, and I think also just try to separate values from the policies. I can't say he's wrong. But compensation and benefits are something we have to do. I would have a value that I would love the town to pay 100% of my health care. I think I speak for any public employee, right, Gary? You know, we would love that. That's just not going to happen. But that's my value. So there's a juxtaposition we have to bring, and I know those of you in the private sector certainly understand this concept.
See, I think of these things as almost mechanical. If this, then that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, you gotta have some moral standing, some values of your own, and you hope the town represent them. But the reality is fiscal policies are mechanical. X% of free cash has to do this.
Right.
And we don't get to make a lot of those kinds of choices. We just don't.
Right, that's right.
Good thought, though. That's, what's the word? Over the moon stuff or whatever. I'm losing the word.
No, but I think to Max's point, on March 6th, the joint budget meeting, this will be a big piece of that, for sure. People will be posed, I think, with the question that Max is bringing up, or the point that Max is bringing up, will be a hard reflection. Next, at least 2 years will be in that boat.
May I just add a comment? I think budgeting is a zero-sum game, and I think when we talk about values, we also talk about competing values. And I think that that's what I was getting to with the opportunity cost, is you have to compare sort of policy A with all the other policies you're doing, and you're not going to be able to get everything. And of course, the raising revenue is another option, and of course, that's a trade-off because people have money and that they're not going to spend that money in the economy. So there's trade-offs there too. So I think that the, Administrator Helen is right that values, you do have to sort of, when you have values in the system, it is a sort of a zero-sum game. But I don't think that means you should just ditch the values from the conversation. You just got to make sure that you have a balanced budget and you have to acknowledge that those values compete with one another.
Yep.
Thank you.
My perception is every department head in this town has high values and tries to do a budget that supports them. I don't know how else to say that. I mean, the police chief, the fire chief, Brutus, the school superintendent all have values, and they try to reflect it in their budgets, I think.
I think that's accurate, and I think when we go through the budget hearings in May, we'll do the due diligence as we always do to go through every line item. It's all laid out, and people are gonna have to say, well, maybe our value is, we're not gonna do more tree trimming this year, right? Because we need to make sure that we fund, the school department at the level they need. That's a question that we'll, giving you a little teaser, that's the type of questions that are gonna come up, I think in the budget model in another month.
Okay. We all good? Yes? Anybody else here they have thoughts, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Well, we're gonna talk about the policy
Yeah.
on the
We'll
agenda
go-
anyway,
What I'd
so,
like to do is go through them. We have some
Yeah.
minutes to approve. Minutes
Yeah.
of January 10th.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Roll call. I can do a roll call. George, yes. Nat?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Heather?
yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Shannon's not here. Lauren?
Yep.
6, 7, no. Okay, next on the agenda, we're skipping a deep dive this month. We'll get our opportunities to deep dive in March 7th or 6th or whatever it is, and then again in May. Review of town financial fiscal, financial and fiscal. What I think I'd like to do is just go down them.
Yep.
And I spent a lot of time reading.
Great.
Right. Balanced annual budget, I can't imagine, I guess that what it means is we'll do it with current income, we won't borrow money to do regular stuff. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, these are a lot of these are still holdovers for many years. There was no reason to change it, no reason to do anything. I think what the general point here is that, annual costs are funded from annual revenues, right? Meaning we're not punting out, debt and interest are different. Borrowing's different, that's later on, but it's saying you're gonna have a balanced budget. Probably not in the most direct language possible, but that you're gonna not you're not gonna spend in the red for your operating budget. I think that's the general point there. And I think there's a question about sustainability that verbiage-wise might wanna go in there, but they do not defer current, that's really about prioritizing sustainable initiatives, not spending way too much and then having to cut, right? So sustain what's in your budget, and I think right there, you're really working within Prop 2.5. Probably, again, not the most direct language. If people want to revise it, that's fine, but it's really about living within your means.
Okay, anybody? Compensation and benefits. I have only one question. Obviously, you budget with what you have to spend. Compensation should be based on the market and performance. What is the market? Is it municipalities our size, our demographics, that kind of stuff? And performance, my note was, do we have a bonus plan?
Performance relates to loss runs.
To
You
what?
ever heard of loss runs? Anybody in insurance or risk
Insurance
management?
runs, yeah.
Right, so loss runs are, for example, and it's all in the budget narrative, loss runs are essentially how much you pay into the system and how much do they pay out for the liability. So most of our loss runs on healthcare have been between 90%, which if you have a 90% loss run, that means you pay, for every dollar you pay to healthcare, they pay out 90 cents. So when you start getting to 105% loss runs, that means they're losing money on you. And Franklin has been within that 92 to 108 range for like 20 years or something. You know, maybe one big up or one dip, but generally the average has been for every dollar we put in, they pay out $1 in benefits. So for anybody in business,
Yeah.
that's not really like a great ROI, right? So when people see this year, and it's been out there, when the people see a health insurance rate commensurate across Massachusetts at 9.5%, that's because healthcare companies are not making money, not providing sustainable reserves, because they're paying out $1 for every dollar that we pay into the system, either co-pays, deductibles, employee contribution, town contribution, et cetera, into the entire pool. The market references what is dwindling in Massachusetts, which is a competitive market. So that does not mean just among municipalities, that's just the marketplace. That's all health insurance providers. And generally speaking, on a very COVID aside, we traditionally go out to bid to all the major healthcare carriers on an annual or on a regular basis. We work through our employee unions called an insurance advisory committee. It's a statutory piece. We have managed through the IAC, and again, there's lots of narrative in the budget documents about this. The health savings accounts, the high deductible offerings we've done, those have literally saved us from laying off tons of employees. And our employees are making those decisions. So when this was written years ago, the market was really the global market in health insurance. Now people may understand Massachusetts is a very limited marketplace. And it just became more limited because Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim merged 2 years ago to something else like Health 43 or Point 43. So now we're getting closer and closer to really no marketplace in Massachusetts other than 3 or 4 carriers, including the GIC, which is the state-run group insurance commission. So that's what that reference is right there. And obviously the current revenues are, we're not debt spending to pay for benefits. Meaning the benefits has to be a priority, and I'm pretty sure that's why Jeff put that one up right at the top, because just you're dealing with benefits, if you have to do it. It's like pension obligations. You just can't not pay it. You just have to do it. So I hope that helps a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
It feels like that bullet should be separated, like
Yeah.
a compensation bullet and then a benefits bullet, because they're kind of handled differently. Like what you just explained is benefits, and that's super expensive, coming from the private sector. Benefits take a ton of, and every year they're going up more and more, right? So, and that's almost its own, but the compensation should almost have its own line item, I think, just to.
Well, is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
I agree with you on that, for sure. I'd like to know a little bit more about what market and performance the base comps are based off of. Do you use some sort of a survey or and performance metrics? Is that what that, 'cause that's how I read it.
Because it says
Performance metrics
compensation.
are really
Yeah.
one thing, it's loss runs.
I
That's
know, but
exactly
that's
what
for
rates are
benefits,
based off.
right?
Rates
That's-
are,
But I'm talking about somebody's,
Because it says
Annual-
compensation.
if you took compensation word off there,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would be more accurate, and then you'd be fine. I agree with you, Lauren. Compensation is a different area.
it's the
Um,
whole package, right?
Right.
I think in a more like, we just finished our first compensation and classification study and plan a year and a half ago. We don't have any financial policy on it, because it's never been done before. I think what Jeff originally was saying in both of these is, you're not gonna give people a 5% raise and defer that cost into future years. So compensation and benefits is usually a marriage, obviously. And so I think it was a very brief and simple policy. If you wanted to get rid of the word compensation, that bullet would be a little easier. But what they're saying is budget with current revenues on compensation. In other words, you can't go give an 8% raise because inflation's 8%. Employees say, well, I gotta pay for inflation. You can't do that because you don't have the money to do it.
But so how are the increases, what are they based on?
Usually collective bargaining agreements.
Is that
Yeah.
all around? Yeah,
And
okay.
the town has a priority that we have COLA equity policy, basically, which is everybody gets the same COLA, no matter what unit or non-union you're in. And that's just a cultural value we hold,
Okay.
because that prevents getting into the problem with this policy, which is one union gets 4%, another gets 1%, and then 3 years later in collective bargaining, somebody wants to get the 4% that they got, and then you get into an escalation factor, and then all of a sudden people people aren't treated in their minds fairly or equitably. And if I just say across the board, this is the COLA that we can afford for the year, and this is what we spend,
But
then
do-
that's it.
Does that include, like, is every person that's paid out of the payroll of town of Franklin is in a union?
3/4.
And so what about the other
80%?
quarter? Or the other 20%?
The non-union get the same as the union.
They have the same COLA,
Yep.
they have the same, everything. Okay, and the same performance metrics.
Yep. We
Across
don't
the
really
board.
do, just to be honest, like performance
Yeah.
metrics are way not in our ballpark. Like, they're just, that's why I needed to hire a budget and fiscal analyst to
Yeah.
even try to attempt to like grow that into our financial office. But analytics, metrics, just like literally just off the table, because there's a thing that like, I would love to have all sorts of analytics, but there's just literally, we barely have enough staff to get payroll, AP, HR letters. We don't even have enough staff to do just that. So I'm just bringing up performance metrics. We don't do them.
Can I ask you a question? You talked about this operational analyst a couple of times. Is there actually a head count? Is there actually like a job out and a head count looking, like a time for
Yeah.
that job to be hired?
I'm hopeful that it'll get posted by the end of the month, and we'll have somebody hopefully on board after budget season this year.
Okay.
I'm trying to also help my own sanity by having somebody other than myself and Kerry and Amy and Chris write the whole budget, which, is just administratively challenging.
Yeah.
Plus, I also recognize, and I think, Natalie, George certainly know this for many years, I just certainly recognize that as we become more of a more intellectual place, we're gonna seek out more intellectual information. And with that comes historical data sets, which we've grown year by year over a bunch of years, and you can see them on the budget archives. But then people ask me all the time for like, can you give us the last 15 years of COLA history among every unit in town? Well, then that takes like months of work for us to go get all that together, pull it together. And so what I want to try to do with this position is really get those data sets on like school enrollment, COLAs, free cash history, debt history, like a whole variety of things, and just have somebody grow those numbers so we can see them over a longer period of time, and hopefully get to Heather's, just general comment about like maybe in the future we can see better trends.
Yeah.
We can look at the numbers a little bit differently and just try to make some other policy decisions that might actually help. Our tax levy, as you'll learn, Lauren, is just not in that place right now because our values here are not like Needham. So we have far less revenue than those towns. And so we act, to George's point earlier, traditionally, a lot of the combined departments we have, facilities, technology, obviously being in this building, schools don't have one lease. We don't have one lease. We're in one building. Those efficiencies have been kind of the way that Franklin has been able to get through the fact that our just overall tax levy cap is very, very small, relatively speaking, for a town our size.
Is there, this is my ignorance, is there, are you allowed to tell me like what kind of accounting software the town has?
Munis.
What is it called?
It's called Munis.
It's like municipal accounting, obviously.
It's a near monopoly. It's called, the company's called Tyler Technologies.
Okay.
Um,
Does it actually have a place to store all this data, or would this all have to be done like in the cloud somewhere separate in Excel spreadsheets?
No, again, one more unique thing. Most towns don't have, the school has their software, the town has their software. They're paying for two separate systems that can't speak to each other. And so you're paying two software licenses, you're paying double. Fortunately, we don't do that here. And I would say for the last 15 years, we've been on Munis, I think since like '08. Really, Miriam Goodman was a big part of that too. When she came out as school business administrator, the town got in some trouble back then. George will maybe remember, but the schools got in some trouble back then, actually. I should be more specific. But it kind of cleared house, Lauren, and everybody got under the same umbrella. I will say this, though. Our staff has really looked at a lot of the modules in Munis that we are not taking advantage of, like onboarding. We've invested in the budget but haven't had the staff time to do it. We've looked at cloud-based electronic personnel records. We've been talking about that for 3 years. We still haven't gotten to it because because we just have so much going on, and we have so few staff here in the finance office, both town and school. So we all work under the same roof. That's really good, but I think it's the consensus of all the finance team, and Carrie certainly knows this. We're not taking yet full advantage of what Munis actually can enable us to do. Did you say that's right, Carrie?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Slow but surely.
So I think in light of all of what you've just explained, I think that this bullet item, compensation of employees should be based on market and performance, should definitely be enhanced in some way, maybe even broken out into subcategories to kind of understand that, first of all, benefits, which includes, and then they should be probably insurance, whatever else it is, HSA, whatever's offered, are based on the market of those categories. So that, like, insurance would be based on an insurance market data. And then the compensation, so as an example, you say you're hiring somebody, great, is there some sort, how did you determine what to pay, what kind of salary to pay that person? So I would say that you would want to put something in that line item. Do you know what I mean? That's where when I see market, I say, oh, there must be like a Mercer data or something out there.
There is.
Yeah.
It's online.
So,
I mean, I could
yeah.
put the compensation and classification study. So that's new for us, so I can add that in there because that's online. the
'Cause that's what
study's
I think
there,
when it
and
says
that's what
market.
and that's exactly what market is intended to be. So we can add the compensation and classification.
But definitely, there's two things that market means: insurance
Yep.
market, and then
Well,
the
it's health insurance, life insurance.
Yeah, all
it's
all the
that
insurances.
list of benefits, right? So it's just defining benefits. Really, what you want in here is a definition of benefits and compensation.
I would.
So that's very easy to do.
And then performance, does that mean how the market performs or how the employee performs?
Employee performance.
Okay, compensation of employees should be based on employee performance, which you don't have any metrics to base the performance on, though. So you just say good, bad?
Is the job getting done? That's exactly
Okay.
what Jeff Nutting would
Okay.
tell you here.
No, that's
We
fine.
tried,
I'm trying to understand it.
When I
so-
got here, we tried annual goals. Carrie will laugh because it just,
Good stuff.
yeah.
It's totally fine.
We're an organization of almost 1,100 people, so when you look at, I need a whole nother staff to deal with just that. And I'm embarrassed by it, to be honest with you. It's not exactly a pride point because, labor attorneys or other towns are doing
Well, I
this
think you
stuff.
could just say that. You could just say the performance is based on
We'll just say employee
completion
performance.
of job duties or however you want to do that.
Sure.
But since it's a policy, and this is a policy,
Yeah.
it should be
Yep.
what it is
Yeah,
in
I don't wanna
writing.
I don't wanna be labored, but just
Yeah.
I think benefits is market and performance. It sounds like the base comp is COLA. Cause
Right.
if you're doing your job or not, you get fired if you're not, you're not really, unless you're giving some people 4% and some people 2%, performance is kind of not applicable
Yep.
in the way I think about it.
You got it.
Is that horse dead? No.
So dead.
Max has got it.
I just had a question. Do you feel like, in terms of this policy, we are meeting it in that all of our employees are paid fair market rate?
Sorry, Max?
Oh, yes. So in terms of us meeting this policy, we're saying that all of our employees should be paid fair market. Is that currently the case?
It's pretty accurate. It's pretty
Okay.
close. I mean, I think, some of it's a little subjective depending on who you're talking to, what it is. I mean, unfortunately, this isn't like robots where like we can easily see like, here's one class of employees in the private sector and it's clear that those are the numbers for an engineer, right, say, or whatever. You got to remember like, positions like town clerks, right? It's hard to nail that because some are elected, some are appointed. Some gave up their raises for years. Some are paid in communities that value it more. Some of it's political, some of it's not. When you look at chiefs of police, one of the things in the compensation and classification plan I was adamant about, which was we got all these ranges for market, and then we found out like all these people were being paid in other towns outside of the ranges. So as a consultant, I said, I'm just not doing that. Like, that's just ridiculous. Because if the range is 100 to 150, and you're paying someone 170, or 10 towns are paying outside the range, if somebody left, how am I going to pay someone within the 100 to 150 range when everyone's making 170? It doesn't make any sense. So Franklin actually kind of drove a little bit of the latest wave of this, where I said, our ranges need to be based on actuals. Like, what are people really being paid? Because that's how you recruit, right? You don't recruit saying we lowball you. We recruit by saying, right, like, here's the actuals of the 30 miles around of us of what a commute would likely be. And so all of this, I don't want to dive into the 100-page report. It's all online. You can all read it. I'm just giving you an illustrative example of, so when people say, are you doing this? I would say yes. I'm sure some people may still have some sort of beefs of where they're at in the plan. But I also told the whole staff, and I told the FinCom last year, you got to start somewhere. We never even had a floor on this. So we've committed to doing the class study. What we do is we take FY24, and then we have the COLA for FY25, and we just times all of the categories by that COLA percentage, so 2.5%. So whatever the unions agree to in 26, 27, 28, then our market each year on the comp and class study will follow that. And then every 5 years, we check in to say, all right, let's go do a back gut check and make sure our numbers are still within the actual ranges of what's being proposed out there, because sometimes you can't control every other community, right? The chief of police reports to me here, but the chief of police reports to the entire board of selectmen maybe in Norfolk or Medway. So now you have 5 bosses there, whereas the chief has 1 boss here. That's a different dynamic. Those are apples and oranges in the municipal marketplace. It's very hard to compare Wellesley and Franklin on all this stuff because our structures of how we deal with all these things are just so dramatically different.
I would imagine this would come to play when you're talking about like teachers as well, right? Because the
Yeah.
range is very, they could be based on years of service or, what have you. So things like that.
And the community's ability to pay,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So, all of that, all of those things are factored into those things for sure. And it's very, very hard to get, like, to Max's question, there is no scientific day where I'm ever going to say, done. It's just, that's just really, really impossible in the municipal marketplace at the local level in our forms of government. If you were in Kansas in a county form of government, I'll tell you, they'll have it all, it's a lot easier. But we're so unique in every town. We have to do everything differently.
So I guess,
The whole home rule thing.
I noticed that, budget with current revenues and compensate employees should be based on market. Those can conflict sometimes. And so if you don't have enough current revenues to compensate employees based on market performance, what do?
You go back to the top number 1 goal and you say annual cost in front of current revenues, we can't fund that job.
And so that is, and I just want to acknowledge, this is preferable to underpaying employees, correct? That's the consensus.
I would rather, I can't say across the board everywhere, but if you're not gonna properly hire somebody at a tier that can deliver the public good, I'd rather not even deal with it, because now you're just wasting money. In my view, you're setting yourself up for failure by not being able to sustain that position.
Right, I just wanted to go through it, just
Yeah.
because logically,
Yeah.
it's a structural, procedure,
Yeah.
so thank you.
Okay, guys, we've beaten this horse
A good one, though.
to oblivion. I agree. And we have 17 of these to do, so move
The other
on.
ones are easier.
Huh? Revenues. Estimated annuals, which we do clearly, it's readily available.
And chapter 82 is being reviewed this year for fees by the staff as one of the goals for the
Which,
council.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Chapter 82 referenced in here. This calendar year, we're looking at all the fee structure for the whole community. So it's going through a full review this year.
Question, I think the fees, the ambulance fees, we just saw 2 weeks ago. So people pay attention, that was not.
Right.
Financial reserves adequately fund and maintain reserves. I have a couple and then I'll let you guys go at it. Overlay surplus, I haven't heard that used lately. I can't remember the last time I heard it come up in either the budget discussions in May or wherever, or at the council, or anywhere.
Yeah.
Is there a significant overlay surplus, in case you don't know, is when, has funds tax abatements, correct?
Correct.
Basically.
Through the Board of Assessors.
Do we know, I mean, is there a, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it. Does it still exist, I assume?
It always exists. I mean, it's under the control of the elected Board of Assessors. And, abatements are a tricky situation. I'm sure the assessors downstairs, because they're an elected board and they do their thing, unless they ask me for some reason for something, I usually don't go to a lot of their meetings because they do a great job doing what they do. I'd have to check in with Kevin to see what the abatement trends have been. Typically, those go up, skyrocket, usually like at a time when a lockdown happens or a recession. And then sometimes the legislature tweaks them or changes them, and then we have to implement them. There was a report given maybe a year, might have been losing time, maybe a year and a half ago, where I think Kevin came here to the council, and I think he went through all of the veterans abatements and exemptions and all that stuff.
I guess my real.
But just so you know, overlay surplus, you can't just go do it.
No, it's a vote of somewhere.
Yeah, the vote of the Board of Assessors. So there has to be a convincing reason for them to do that. And I just,
Is there, just
procedural.
basic
It's a
question.
procedural
Is the
process
balance up
application.
here or down here?
It's not a surplus, how about we just call it overlay?
Right,
Oh, well, I didn't say surplus, I said the balance is what I said.
There is a
yeah,
balance.
yeah. There's probably a balance. I haven't asked Kevin in a long
Yeah.
time what exactly the balance is.
Okay, I'm
Um,
just-
We can
is
ask
there-
him, but.
There have been times when it's been transferred over.
It was in
dues.
2018. I want to say 2018. I think it was during the last time the school budget had some troubles, that there was a transfer of overlay surplus.
And that's a budgetary item. We put X amount in.
Right.
Based on what they say every year.
That's correct.
It's just, I hadn't heard it in
Yep.
age, that's all. Free cash will be used to fund the capital budget and unforeseen expenses. How? In terms of, we just did free cash on the capital side. I think there's some leftover for contingencies. Is that what you're referring to as unforeseen expenses?
We haven't fortunately had one of those examples in a while, but you'll see when I set up the capital subcommittee meeting, some of what y'all voted on will be altered for unforeseen expenses, mainly relative to the school budget. So there's a good example, right? Fortunately, we haven't had that unforeseen expense because we've had ARPA funds and the schools had ESSER funds from the federal stimulus package, so we haven't really had a lot of those. I think if you went back 10 years, you know, you're correct. If there was like something, the bleachers broke or like, you know, something broke somewhere, you know, Jeff or the superintendent would use excess free cash to solve that problem mid-fiscal year.
Okay. Budget stabilization, we don't have it here.
Well, it's number
3
5.
million something?
It's number 5. Oh, yeah, it's about it's 3 million, yeah.
What's the mechanism to stabilize the budget with that money? Is that a vote of the council to move money
Yes,
to the budget?
2/3.
So
Yep.
is there a trigger that says, now we take some of that $3 million and move it to the budget? Or is it strictly a political statement to move some of the money?
Depends. I think it actually comes back to Max's question or point earlier, is that'll be a challenge this year because there's a balance here between the 2 bond ratings where we've gotten AAA clearly stated that the way that we were able to get that was improving our reserves, notably the budget stabilization, having a policy, which this FinCom did a few years ago with Sue Dusnap, and number 3, you know, the ability to pass voter-led, you know, financing initiatives, Community Preservation Act, Tri-County. Those are both 2 huge points. In fact, Amy and I were talking earlier with the finance director, when you have failed initiatives at ballot initiatives, that actually hurts your bond rating case. So when we get into the inevitable override debate later on this year, people have to be cautious at least a little bit. There'll be a lot of energy to say, just do it until something passes. But you really have to think through, do you really want to lose those votes? Because they do have an impact on your analysis with the bond rating agency. The Budget Stabilization Fund, 2% of any prior year. You know, we're right on target right now. In fact, in that stabilization fund, it's just a little bit more than 2%. It's probably like 2.1, 2.2. That's a good thing, because while people will believe it's raining hard this spring, we can assure you it will rain harder someday. And everybody thinks that day is an emergency. Plus, the more you drain out of that, then you drain your reserves, and when you go back, when Kerry goes to borrow money, then people are going to say you have less reserves, you're spending your reserves, that doesn't look financially as strong, and maybe that's a weakness on our profile, which will jack up interest rates and have that dog chasing its tail effect, which comes back and bites into the operating budget, because now you're paying higher interest rates to do, say, a borrowing for a police station or Remington Jefferson or, you know, whatever big capital project. So, you know, I think actually that policy is very good. And Mr. Chairman, you notice number C, Mr. Dowd and you put in kind of a protection clause in there to make sure that the entire amount, again, to somebody's point earlier, it's a policy, but no more than 50% of that fund can be pulled out all at once. That was in response to what happened in 2019 when we drained $1.85 million, the whole account for the school budget at that time. And that hurt our bond rating.
Okay. Field stabilization, the only question I have about the numbers is, we're in an inflationary period.
Yeah.
I know the fire engine, Hopedale just bought one, it cost $900,000. We
Yeah.
just paid $7 for the 2 new ones that we have. So that in the last, what's that, maybe 3 years ago now, they've gone from $700,000 to $900,000, and we're putting away $100,000 a year. We may have to get horse-drawn stuff at that point. My point is, is there a method to make sure that the numbers that we're using are reality?
Right. Not really. I mean, to be honest with you, I think most of these were numbers that were calculated by Jeff a long time ago, 10 years ago, based on what we did with the last set of fields. They're essentially savings accounts. And so what we're trying to do here, all of those projects, we just went out and borrowed $2 million for a fire truck, right, for an engine. And now if you talk to the chief, that truck is now $1 million more than it was. So we could have saved all the money we wanted, but actually the decision was to have the leadership stand up and order that truck at the time, and we've already killed it on our return on investment. The truck hasn't even shown up yet. So the stabilization fund with Fields, I mean, we're still a handful of years out from the Fields. You're probably gonna end up with CPA now, you probably have another funding source for some of that. But until we get to the level of we need to go out and buy the Fields again, we already have $1 million relative in that account. I think we're in good shape, and I think when you see the competing priorities in other areas, you know, I think those numbers are probably in decent shape right now.
Sort of, I'll skip ahead to 15, the ambulance receipt reserve,
Yeah.
$135,000 annually. The last one we purchased, which is due in June or July, I think, was 430 grand.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether we,
Well, if you do
Adjust
3 years,
or-
if you just do 3 years of that, that's 400 grand.
I agree.
And I think we get a little
I think
longer out of the 3 years out of
we
the
do.
ambulance because we,
If you look at the age of the current ones,
Right.
we
We
buy them every
maintain it.
2 years.
Right. Right.
I just, the numbers, I'm concerned that the numbers don't grow with reality. And I understand they may not have to, there are other ways to do it, but.
or it's close,
Hmm?
or it's close.
All right, yeah.
You
it's
know,
close.
it-
But this ain't horseshoes, right?
No, this is not, well, you'll hear March 6th, mark your calendars. We have the biggest meeting in Franklin history here.
The other question I have is open space. I forget how much is in there,
2.6.
2.6. We're facing buying land potentially for the police station?
Can't do it.
That can't be used for that, so
Nope.
this is strictly open space.
Strictly open space.
Okay.
This was all deposits before the Community Preservation Act. And if you notice, I just forgot it myself, the Finance Committee wisely last year took out the open space policy that we did have in there because of community preservation. So, you know, that was my mistake on the capital plan, putting 100,000 into the open space account, because the policy had been altered, because you now have a borrowing and a funding source through community preservation. So the open space stabilization is kind of there as if there was some other big piece of land coming up or some other recreational project that was significant that needed one-time monies, you could use that. But again, when Kerry goes to borrow money, that $2.5 million in a savings account is actually seen as a really big positive for our bond rating story to tell. So you don't want to use that money if you don't have to.
Okay, but my point is, we're putting it 100 grand in.
We're not,
where
though.
it could be somewhere else.
That's not, it is gonna, we're not gonna move forward with 100 grand. That was my mistake on the capital plan, like I just said. I forgot that we repealed it out of the policy.
Oh, you're saying, what line item is this? I can't find it.
It's
Oh,
not
The
in here
last
anymore.
bullet on number 4.
oh, it's not on this? Oh, okay, that's why I can't find
The
it.
committee repealed it a couple of years ago after
Okay.
CPA.
But you're saying
But
there
it
was
was in the
100 grand
capital
put in on
plan
accident?
that you guys approved last month
Okay, okay.
to go back to $100,000 because there was a lot of people advocating for that because of
Yeah.
their values.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna bring it back to maximum value. In all seriousness, because people are like, wait, we don't want just CPA, we have to keep doing money. But to George just nailed it, like, there's so much other stuff to do. We just have to go, you know,
Yeah.
but you guys already took care of that. That was my fault.
So anything else on,
I was just wondering, short-term revenue surpluses shall fund non-recurring projects. Is this just, is there an example of that? I mean, or do we have revenue surpluses? Short-term? I don't know.
Yeah, there was, we didn't know when the cannabis excise, we have a policy on it now, but at the time when the first store opened, it was after the tax rate was set. So there was a surplus that year of like 125,000 in unanticipated revenues. And so that went toward like a road project. I'm just trying to illustrate an example of it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
You might see a windfall of the power plant mitigation money, Mr. Chairman. You
Yes.
remember that, but for Medway, there was a one-time settlement money for mitigation from that. The town used that at the time to fund mostly the school department budget at the time after the overrides failed in 2010 or something like that. 2008,
actually, it was 2000,
6,
it was just before the only override we'd ever had.
2007 then.
Yeah.
You're right. Yes.
Thank you.
long-term debt. I don't have a question.
I
know
just
it's
gotta
going
raise it because I have to keep bludgeoning this one. People read my budget narratives for the last 5 years. This has been a huge concern of mine, and this will come up again in FY '26, if not earlier, with the Remington Jefferson borrowing to remodel the school. We had 3.5% target over the last several years. That's gone down to 1.7%. 3.5 might be a little high. But again, it was a target. I'm not saying we changed the target. I don't even know the right number. You could do 3. But the germane point is that that has been helping our budget and the operating budget get through for the last several years because the number has gone down as a share of the overall pie. Debt and interest is low. Most people would say that's a really good thing, and it is. However, when you're not aiming at that, you're not borrowing, you're not paying interest, that means you're not doing capital projects over $1 million. $1 million is actually still an accurate number.
Okay, so to summarize, the long-term debt is, I don't know, the fire truck, the
Yeah.
ladder is a long-term debt?
Yep.
20-year probably?
30
Is it
years.
supposed to last
We-
that long?
We
This would be-
want to stick to Mr. Nutting's 20 years. I don't want to be going to 30 or 40. As best we can. 20 years is a very, very good move.
There's nothing we could
Actually,
buy.
the fire is 10 years.
Fire's 10 years.
Is it 10?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Right.
Yes, sorry.
And the
That was just
3.5%,
thinking in my head.
that line item is
Yeah.
things we do that don't require an override, correct?
That's correct. Capital
Smaller
projects.
I
Right.
would guess, yes.
Right. So
Small.
this
know
is
what's
not tasers.
Yeah, no.
This isn't, like, that's why the threshold is $1 million, right?
Senior center in there?
Yep.
It is, though, so that level
Library.
library, okay.
And these are non-debt excluded projects too.
And they're typically 10, 20?
20.
There's a few 30 prior to Jamie, and, you know, and it was Jeff, but early years. And they're falling off now.
Yeah. You'll see this in my tax levy presentation. I think Heather, yeah, thank you. Like the last year I said it too, you can do the tax levy times 2.5%. But when debt and interest falls off, yes, there's more capacity in the operating budget, but when debt exclusions fall off, people don't feel the tax break in their tax rate, but it actually does sunset and that tax does go away. And that's what we've been seeing, which is why the tax levy has been actually less than 2.5% the last couple of years, because as Kerry just mentioned, those debt exclusions are falling off. Suffice to say, the next one to fall off is 26-27 Keller Sullivan,
And Horseman.
and then Horace Mann, and then after that, you're in it, we'll all be gone, because it's the high school, which was like a 40-year borrowing on that. So that's like 2042, 2042, yeah. So,
Those are all non-debt exclusions that you're talking about.
those are all debt excluded.
They're debt, yeah, okay, that's what I
Keller
thought.
Sullivan, Horace Mann will come off in
I
FY
thought at first, and then I
26,
got-
27. The library,
Yeah.
senior center, the municipal building, the fire truck, those are the non-debt excluded ones that'll come
okay.
off when those schedules are up to.
Got it.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question about number 5.
But what?
About number 5 of the stabilization fund. In the town administrator's 5-year plan, he noted that there was a budget shortfall that would only last about 2 years, and then it would go back up a little bit. And I just wanted to see if we say if it's a one-year shortfall, whether that could preclude us from using using the stabilization account for a period of 2 years, where it might alleviate after the 3rd year.
I don't have an answer.
I'm not sure I do either.
Do you not understand my question?
Maybe not.
Okay, so when you had your budget outlook, you said there was a deficit for,
Oh, the 5-year fiscal forecast?
yes, fiscal forecast. You said there was going to be, like, year 3, there was going to be a shortfall of, like, I'm not using exact numbers, 3 million, but then the 5th year, there would be a shortfall of only 2 million.
Right.
So if you, year 3 and 4, if you used money those 2 years, you wouldn't have to cut and then rehire. You
Sure.
could just make it smooth.
March 6th? You'll see on March 6th, again, all of that fiscal forecast will be thrown out the window. Because now I have, I have school numbers most importantly. And so those, you'll see the deficit immediately. We won't have to wait a couple years max. And then number two, this is why we try to do them every year, but you know, these times, the pandemic, I took off a little bit because it was crazy, but now also Tri-County is actually banning part of the debt exclusion project now. So the good news is the tax will be raised for that, so it'll be equal, but you're gonna show much different numbers because the assumptions that went into that model have changed dramatically since I presented last August. There will not be a solvent moment in the future.
Okay, so you know, we won't be shooting ourselves in the foot by
Yeah.
saying 2 years as opposed to 1 year.
You'll see the deficit very clearly, and you'll see the rest of the decade on March 6th.
All right, moving on, capital improvement plan, I didn't have any questions. That's just every year we do.
Yep.
I don't think there's anything in there that would be questionable. Oh, I did have a question. It says bonds will be used for large capital projects over $1 million unless it can be paid off in 5 years. Is that the term of the bond, 5 years? Or do we
No,
just
that's-
make an extra payment on the truck?
Make an extra payment on the truck.
So,
It's so if you, in other words, I think what that policy was like, if the truck is $1 million and you can set aside 200 grand in surplus money over 5 years to get there, don't go out and borrow and pay the interest.
okay. But I don't know how you know that. I mean, we have enough trouble projecting what next year will be, let alone we're gonna know we're gonna have an extra 200 grand. I mean, you either
Well-
have to borrow the money or you don't. Can you make prepayments?
No,
I didn't think so.
no.
So you can't make a prepayment, so it's kind of I guess,
I don't know what, that must have been there for like a scenario that had come up at one point.
so are we
But I
gonna
think the
process-
principle is that,
You don't borrow if you can pay it off in 5 years.
right,
But how do you know you're gonna be able to pay it off? That was my question.
it's a good
My
point.
point now is, shouldn't that just be, see you later, Bill?
Well,
It's not our decision, I don't think, but when this goes to the council, maybe. That doesn't
Yeah.
make a lot of sense to me.
okay.
I mean, if we could, like a car payment, make an extra payment and not have a penalty because we do it.
Yeah.
All right,
They don't
we'll beat that one.
do that.
Enterprise accounts for water, sewer, and refuse.
These are all pretty mature.
That's,
We redid these a couple years ago.
those are.
Yep.
Water fees will support $1.5 million per year for infrastructure. Is the $1.5 million just policy, or can it be $1.7 million because we did Sherman Avenue this year? And, or, you know, that kind of thing. Is that a variable or odd? It's variable, right?
Yeah.
I think it's been, the $1.5 million comes from the habitual 5-year water main replacement plan, which is about $1.5 million a year over 5 years. That's one we do go out and get authorization to borrow for, but we've never actually gone out and borrowed for it. So we get the authorization to spend the money, retained earnings in a non-drought year come in usually at a clip where then we can pay off cash year to year. I will admit that post-COVID, we are still trying to talk to the DPW about where the plan lands in terms of what you can get for your 1.5 million, so you're getting less water main for that money. But I think from a structural financial perspective of affordability for residents, we're leaving it at that number right now. Even if you used to get 1 mile of pipe and now you get 3/4 of a mile, that is what it is, and we'll have to do some readjustments in the future.
Right, but it's still. Sewer fees, same thing, 400 grand. Do we have any plans to expand sewer? We have capacity, but no, okay. I don't have a problem with that either.
No, we're in very good shape on sewer.
Refuse, same thing. I mean, it's still the best deal in the area, I know that.
Yep. there'll be a rate increase coming, you know, during budget season to make up, but I think you're right. It's still a lower annual rate than it was 15 years ago. It's just a volatile that's a classic market. Recycling's a global marketplace.
There's the
Sorry.
extra fee, right, that kind of falls under the water sewer refuse, right? Isn't there an extra fee paid in with your taxes?
Yep. Water, sewer, trash.
The bill, the utility.
No,
bill.
not that.
Stormwater?
Yeah, is that what I'm
stormwater
thinking
got
of?
it.
That's what I'm
That's-
thinking of. Should that be in here somewhere?
It should be, but we're not ready to do it yet. We're still going through the first year of the utility. There's gonna be a minor stormwater rate hike as well. But we're trying to work on the next 5-year plan to find out what the phosphorus reduction requirement is and what that's gonna cost. I think once we get through 2 years of the utility and we've got everything certified properly with the Department of Revenue, we'd probably come back in a couple of years and say, here's a better guidance policy right now on that.
Does it make sense to put, where this is the fiscal policy of the town, does it make sense to put a pin of some sort, or a note that there is the
You
stormwater
could put item
fee?
D,
I'm just-
stormwater, to be determined in 2026.
Something like that? I mean, because it is in fact, something that we do receive or people pay. And I was kind of thinking that with the CPA as well.
So
I
we'll
don't know
get
if
to
that
CPA
falls-
in a minute, but.
Oh, all right,
But to be determined, I would just say in 2026.
yeah, okay.
Because we're working with the feds on this, so,
The stormwater?
yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
all federal unfunded mandates.
Snow and ice, are we accounting for inflation? That's the only question I had.
Yeah,
'Cause what
this is an
cost
interesting
us $1
one.
million in 15 or whatever whatever the year was that, you know, that the cost of salt then and the cost, you know. And I
To
don't
be
know-
honest with you, this one you could actually get rid of. And I think,
Yeah, because
you
it's
know,
in Brutus's budget.
it's in Brutus's budget now, and.
But the
and-
number still has to be determined, I understand it, but that's a budgetary item versus a policy item.
Right. I'm concerned about the 5-year piece. You know, I was looking, while I was homesick the last week and a half, I was watching the news, and this meteorologist put up the snow totals for the last 20 years on the screen. And, you know, it just, despite what people want to say about climate change and this stuff, it's not really true. It's just, if you go back, and some of the highest snow years were recently, and some of the lowest snow years ever were in the 1930s or the 50s or whatever. I'd like to look at that. If people are willing to leave that there, I would like to get Brutus and Kathy to have better data about maybe a 10-year average or 20-year average, just so it's equalized out. So we're not looking at 5 years of 3 years of no snow, and then a year from now, we get pummeled with 120 inches.
You
know,
could
and I-
move it, right? You
you
could
know,
move
But I
it.
think there's no,
to
I
a
would be
bullet,
hesitant
yeah.
to like change a lot, because I just think that the numbers of what we've spent and what has been happening, you don't want to be in a position where you don't have the operating budget capacity, because there is really no emergency reserve. And this is the only downside to doing this in the entire operating budget, but that's, you know, we needed to get there, and that's what every town does appropriately. But we have the right amount of money in the budget now. It's just a question of, you know, what are the metrics looking forward? But I haven't looked at any numbers to really determine that.
OPEB. Put my-
Did you have anything else, Heather?
No, well, I was, sorry,
I'm sorry.
instead of taking snow and ice off, you could, I was thinking, move it to number 14, road, sidewalk, infrastructure, and you could make it a bullet under there of snow and ice budget, because that's what it's for, right, the roads and sidewalks.
It is, although that one probably is the one that I'm gonna critique the most.
Okay, we'll get there then.
Because that's just, you'll see on
All
March
right.
6th, there's
Just
really
thinking
no hope
instead
for
of
sidewalks.
take it off, yeah.
Yeah, we just gotta like take that off the table, I think.
OPEB.
We're killing it.
It's killing us too. I mean, if you use this, we got 500 and, well, how much is in the budget? The proposed, the FY
Probably
20?
800, probably 800, 750?
800.
800?
800, plus 10% of free cash, which this year would have been
752.
450 grand?
452.
So, that's that's $1 million we're putting in OPEB. That, I still get confused, why would, we're putting $1 million away this year. But we can't, it's for, it's for
It's for when Jamie retires.
teachers and whatever in 2038. Yes?
Yeah, it's
So,
an unfunded liability.
And it's like you can't, there's a lot of money sitting there. How much now?
12 million.
12 million. And we can't spend it. So,
Can we borrow against it?
No.
Just a thought.
Actually, the town of Wellesley passed an $85 million override to fully fund their whole OPEB operation like 8 years ago or something like that. So Wellesley is #1 in the state where they've fully funded their entire OPEB obligation, right?
It was hurtful.
Nothing against the good people of Wellesley. It's a financially smart move, whoever made those decisions. But they did an override to do it. And so they're #1. After that, we're in the top 10%. Actually, Dan Sherman, one of your favorites, George, will be at the council meeting on February 28th, and he's going to give us our latest OPEB actuarial to say, stay the course.
tape it and some night you can't sleep, go for it.
I'm sure he'll be skiing in Breckenridge again.
All right, hotel motel, that's pretty straightforward.
I would just
And
note
now
there
another
that the
hotel.
governor has proposed increasing that by 1%. And which for us is actually a no-brainer because with a 4th hotel coming on and the World Cup coming here in 2 years and hotels starting to rebound with concerts and everything, it's a no-brainer. So we're gonna try to engage the legislature on that,
Are we
because
gonna get our 4th hotel back, the one that's temporarily, or
we'll
get,
know shortly.
we'll know
We
shortly.
will know in a few months, yep.
Instead of saying 6%, should we say based on the current tax rate or?
Well, we
or-
probably just change it when I want to make sure I respect them, the process to vote for it and all that stuff. Because the
Oh,
legislature still
okay.
has to pass it.
Oh, right,
They still take a year or two. So we'll just change that number, Heather, when the vote goes through.
yeah.
Marijuana tax? Have we collected it at the expected rate this year?
Yep.
Yeah.
We have.
It's helping us out a lot. Based on sales data too, where they broke another record last year, it seems to be helping a lot of other folks too. 1.56 billion statewide
Statewide?
in sales, yep.
If you use the lottery number of 1.6 billion, I think, then we ought to get $2 million out of it. It's
Doesn't
different.
quite work like that,
It's-
but
it's different. This is where I went, oh, I'm sorry, anybody else on marijuana? No. Don't smell any around here. Ambulance receipts, I already mentioned that. Anybody else? Road, sidewalks, and infrastructure, 6. What's the annual now?
600.
But staying, it was in 19, it was 600, has it not inflated?
It got cut during the budget issues in 18-19, generally relating to the schools again. And then the pandemic hit, we were never able to get back any of that. We just finally this fiscal year got back to so if you want to put in there FY 20, what are we in for? FY 24, that would be one comment I would have because the last 5 years obviously got discombobulated. So it's said in 19, but that never really happened. So I would say at least at a minimum put FY 24 in there and we'll try to start anew.
And that goes back to point 1, bullet 1, annual costs are funded from current revenues, and that's
think so, yeah.
why that happened. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the most money we've ever had in the operating budget for roads, ever.
We have how many miles? 290 somewhat miles?
I don't know, at some
sorry,
point
it's
it becomes
lane
very
miles.
depressing. Yeah, it's just not, I don't even know if this policy is sustainable. We'll add FY 24 here, and then we'll add 50,000 in the proposal. I don't know whether it will make the cut in the final budget. And I would say further use free cash and hotel tax funds. That's fine. I would probably take out the numbers of 500,000, 575. Those are just totally unrealistic. They're just completely unrealistic sustainability-wise. if there was extra money, like snow and ice, if we had a low year, we'll certainly go out and do more, we're certainly gonna plan to go out and do more road projects. But you can't count on that if you have a high snow year. And by the way, do you wanna know how much money we've spent so far this year on snow and ice?
200 grand,
650,000.
and it hasn't snowed.
Bingo. Salt, increased demand.
Or that liquid stuff that they're using.
Right, the brine, which actually saves us money,
Yeah.
right? Well, a lot. Labor is huge. And Sunday, great, yeah, Amy, I'm throwing out my pro-union. It's great for the guys on Sundays to get double time, but they get double time and we've had snow on Sundays. So it's great for the families and it's great for our team, but it's also a big budgetary cost when it snows on Sundays, right? So just by chance, plus you get 4 inches of snow, and then like one of the storms we had to go scrape because it was gonna freeze to like 12 degrees 2 days later, and you gotta get rid of that while you have a chance. This week hasn't been a problem at all, and this weekend will be Florida, but it's still 650 grand already, and that's what everybody said, it hasn't even snowed yet.
What's the budget for it?
1.4 million.
Man, I'll be hitting the golf ball soon, so.
I know, that's,
what they
Bill,
publish.
at our finance
That
meeting, we had
sounds
the
good to
same
me.
reaction, Bill, that you did, like, wow. That's
I
why,
was-
that's why that
Oh,
snow and ice
right.
line item, I don't like the 5-year average, I
No.
think at some point, snow and ice just has to be funded at the level it is. Right, like it's not like the money's wasted if you don't spend it, but what if it's not there?
Right.
I'm not gonna walk out and people say, I can't cut your road, right? And then, what am I gonna have to do mid-year? Make cuts to other departments if we have to do snow and ice? So having a plump snow and ice budget is actually a really wise move, because you can see, if we had 40 inches of snow already, the conversation today would be vastly different.
All right, so, 17, isn't that a duplicate of the last line in 4?
I'm
Wait,
only
where
at
are you?
four-
Space fund to 2 million, and the last line of,
I think you're looking at an older copy.
Yeah, it stops at 14.
oh, it does.
I think we cut some of the older ones out.
I printed this today. Just,
Do you want that one?
yeah, I'm not reading from
There's an extra.
this one that I got tonight. So I
Oh.
made my notes on the one I printed at home.
Start with
I have
All right, George.
Just making sure.
All right.
It's less work for you.
All right, let's move, if we're done. The free cash summary?
You ask and you shall receive, Mr. Chair. So
Yes, I saw
we
that.
gave a overview, and you can see generally how free cash is calculated. So you can see there's 2 real categories. One is returns of the general fund, which is unspent monies during the year. And then number 2 are local receipts that came in over projection. So
Can I
that's
assume-
hotel, motor vehicle excise, cannabis revenue, federal revenue, miscellaneous debris, meals tax revenues, licenses and permits, building permits. We are reshuffling the numbers this year, Mr. Chairman, to break out ambulance receipts out of miscellaneous with the building commissioner, but, most of these other categories, most people aren't probably aware of, and they're not really big budget things. But anytime we get in more revenue than what we projected, that goes into free cash.
And I assume we budget on a conservative number.
This year, we did not, and we are just getting over, at the end of December, we were at 50.1%, meeting the mark. Traditionally, in the last few years, we were several percent before, higher than that. That's why we expect finally next year, the free cash total will be lower than what we projected. But that also doesn't account for maybe the hotel that comes on board, or some other things that we, so.
So is it normal to have all these go over this?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yep.
I think it's intentional.
I mean, ultimately, if you look at like the capital plan, how they're, you know, it was like 1.21 million for the schools for sped vans, curriculum,
yeah.
technology, all that stuff. They wouldn't be able to buy any of that if we didn't do it this way. So there is like some, George is right, we've gotten a little less conservative about this in the last couple of years. But at some point, we're gonna come back down to earth, and we're gonna have to really make sure that we're doing a better job targeting those numbers. Because when you dissipate free cash number, then you can't buy capital stuff,
Right.
right?
The one
I hope
number
that
that
makes
really
sense.
caught my attention was property tax. I thought that was pretty, I mean, it is what it is. And
Maybe
we
that's not listed.
receive
Payment in lieu of
more.
taxes?
Is that because of growth?
Oh,
Property tax, the bottom, 91 million versus 90. So we receive less than we buy 600 grand.
No, that's,
than we
I collected.
collected, all right. Do we have some big delinquents?
99.3% collection, George, Mr. Chairman.
yeah,
I understand, but it's still short, that's all,
right.
I'm sorry.
you know.
Oh, so some
Some
weren't,
people didn't pay.
okay. But we got penalties up there for that, right? That's what
Bingo.
that is.
Yeah.
14%.
130.
14% every day.
Just to do my Jeff
Okay.
Nutting impersonation, 14%. We make good money on penalties.
On
Good work.
It's a good
Scoff
ROI,
laws.
right? It's really not very, that's
Is that
certainly not
any
my
physical-
value. 100% for compliance, but
is the difference typical?
Yes,
Huh? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Quick comment.
Yep.
I love this. I think it's really good, and even I'm just seeing that the second one, the free cash department returns, already seeing where my mind would go. I'd love to see this year over year, so I just kind of see that this is not really in that type of format. So just thinking in the future, like I'd love to see that. But
Okay.
another question is obviously seeing huge numbers from DPW, benefits, police, seeing a tiny number from the schools. I know they run different. What do they do with any excess?
you'd have to ask them.
Correct.
Because they would have
That's
some,
my
right?
plead the
Like,
fifth
you
moment.
don't have 100%
They-
signatures the whole time.
They have statutory ability to move money around a
Okay.
lot more than we do, like a lot. Like we have to do budgetary transfers, get things certified BDUR. They're all under DESI. You know, and to be defensive of them on this, like they're dealing with such a shuffle of ins and outs. I think there's a reason why they have that ability is to plug gaps because we're dealing with children, right? I mean, that's essentially it. But that's their revolving funds.
Okay.
And then special assessment monies they get, maybe from Title IX, federal government, all that stuff. They have a lot more leeway. I think this is a conversation that we've been asking to have with them for a long time. And I think these are the questions that all of you on the budget subcommittee, I think Lauren, you know, George, Natalie, and Nicole, you know, you have to ask these questions of them, of the school business administrator and the superintendent, and dig into that, I think, during the budget debate, and what they do with those revenues.
Yeah.
Because this comes into user fees, Natalie,
Yep.
right? And like, are we paying for the service with the fee? Or are other monies doing that? You are correct. That's one reason why I was happy to do this, because you can see, like, ambulance receipts, and you'll see this in the budget proposal, and I'll give you a little teaser too. When we raise the ALS and BLS rates, and we get more money in revenue for the fire department, we want to invest that in the fire department in that unique case. Why? Because that's what people are doing. They're calling 911. So we need a third ambulance, that type of thing, right? You know, the police on here turned back $300,000 or so, but when you look at the capital plan, they're buying $350,000 in cruisers. If TJ was to have a bad budget year or some unforeseen circumstance, instead of getting 5 cruisers, he would get 4. He knows that. The police department knows those transitions. Brutus knows this system we have very, very well. And as you can see here, there really is not a lot of extra big ticket monies that departments are turning back. Most of this is lowbrow stuff because of staff transitions, or a contract came in a little lower, or a bid came in right. I mean, you're talking planning 20,000, the town administrator 15,000. I'm sure I just gave up a couple conferences or something, you know, didn't spend all my office supplies. I mean, these are small amounts of money out of a $150 million a year budget. But the school numbers outside of the operating budget number they get is all under the control of the school business administrator, the superintendent, and the school committee. So those questions, I think, are things you should think about as members, you know, write them down and ask them these things in March or in May when we go through the budget cycle.
Okay, great, thank you.
One, we turned back, $1,148. Actually,
Very generous.
Heather and I used some of it this year going to the finance committee
Yeah.
meeting. Could
Well
we
worth it.
convert some of that to somebody to create minutes?
Yeah, probably.
What's a, yeah, I got them into you too late, because Nicole wasn't here and I forgot. So I did them, I sat and listened to the stupid video, and, come on. We're the biggest committee in town without a recording secretary. I can't
That's accurate.
imagine that she'd be that expensive to do the same thing that I just did last night on the, listening to you talk and me talk, just to record.
I'll talk to Judith and see if she has time.
Yeah, she can,
I don't know if she has time. She does 5 boards, so I just gotta figure out if she has
What,
time.
we hardly meet except once a month,
Right.
right? But, and our meetings tend to be this, I mean, we've been here an hour and 25 minutes, and my notes of this meeting wouldn't be real comprehensive, I'll tell you that. All right, you wanna give budget updates on Governor Healy and?
Just to give a teaser for March 6th, in Governor Healy's budget, we lost $75,000 in local aid from last year. So we're at a net decrease. And
That's after the final, is it final?
no, it's just her
No.
proposal.
Right, okay.
I expect it to go neutral by the time the legislature gets done with it, but for anybody that's been watching the news, the January tax collections came in $328 million lower than the revised number. Mainly this is due to the declining enrollment, hold harmless aid by the schools. We're the second highest hold harmless in Massachusetts after Boston, due to the declining enrollment, and mainly because the governor cut special education circuit breaker and charter school reimbursement, which is where Franklin benefits in the Chapter 70 formula. So because of our growing affluence in the last 10 years, and our declining enrollment, and our inability to continue to raise the tax levy, maybe that's a value max, we're stuck in a very brutal hold harmless situation of probably now tens of millions. And when the governor, Karen Spilka, was clear, when the Student Opportunity Act was passed, the Senate and Senator Spilka went all in on charter school reimbursement and special education circuit breaker, which we get significant reimbursements from. The governor has now cut those, which hurts the town of Franklin's Chapter 70 formula. Traditionally, the legislature, Amy knows this too, they'll up, the House goes higher than the governor, the Senate goes higher than them. The danger here is, by the time the summer gets here, I think the legislature at the end of July is gonna know whether or not they have sustainable budgets or not. We may go lower, we don't know. But obviously the trend is not good. And it's something the community's gonna have to talk seriously about. There's no more kicking the can down the road on this one. As Amy knows well from her legislative experience, when there's budget troubles up on Beacon Hill, this is where slivering starts happening on these types of things. And the formula is very non-advantageous for the town of Franklin. There is no state assistance that's gonna come in and save the day. It's just not gonna happen. And when legislators that are in districts with increasing enrollment, like a Needham or a Hopkinton, those legislators go in and fight for the formula changes to help their district, right? And the ones that have the declining enrollment, we just better hope that the hold harmless aid doesn't start to get chipped away at up on Beacon Hill. So it's something that I've warned the community about for many years, and I hope it doesn't come to that day, but it's something we're gonna have to really monitor very closely. And then the other questions was just if anybody had any questions about town budget updates or the governor's budget. Happy to answer any questions folks may have.
Yes, anybody? Motion to adjourn from somewhere?
I'm sorry?
Motion to adjourn from somewhere?
Motion.
Second.
Roll call. George, yes. Natalie?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
And I tried to get you a helper tonight. Heather?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Shauna's not here. Mike never showed. Lauren?
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Amen.
Good night.
Recording
Said you all.
stopped.
So March 6th, we have this meeting and the joint budget?
Nope.
I'm confused.
It's just,
You should watch.
Oh, no,
you just can't call in. You got slapped
I
last time.
know.
remember?
This is WFPRLP Franklin on 102.9 FM.